Hey everyone, welcome back to the archive. Last time we watched our protagonist, Cheng Bao, now living under his official title, Zuo Qifeng, navigate a massive military crisis. The notorious street tyrant, Xiao the Flare, met his gruesome poetic end, beaten into a permanent cripple by the wooden clubs of the River Fleet sailors and ultimately freezing to death on the icy concrete steps of Harbin Pier. As his frozen corpse was dragged away, the curtain fell on his petty reign of terror, proving the ancient proverb, justice may tarry, but it always arrives. With that bloody legal case quietly swept under the bureaucratic rug, the, the calendar pages drifted into the chilly autumn of 1941. And it was during this precise season that a subtle and yet deeply ominous transformation took place outside the massive red brick headquarters overlooking the Songhua. And river laborers climbed up wooden ladders and ripped down the gleaming copper plaque that had hung proudly for nearly a decade. The one that read Greater Manchukuo River Defense Fleet Headquarters. In its place, they bolted a massive, heavy wooden sign with bold, aggressive characters that sent a chill through the naval barracks, a Greater Manchu Empire River Army Headquarters. To the casual observer walking the streets of Harbin, that I too might have looked like a simple corporate rebranding, a mere shuffling of words. But to the men inside the system, this was a tectonic shift in the balance of power. It signaled that this unique naval unit that originally built and modeled strictly it after the elegant traditions of the Imperial Japanese Navy was being stripped of its autonomy and absorbed directly into the rigid, iron-fisted jurisdiction of the Imperial Japanese Army. And along with this structural takeover came the man sent to enforce it, Major General Lin Baoji, the newly appointed Army Chief of Staff. General Lin was a cartoonish, yet profoundly terrifying figure. He was a pint-sized tyrant, short in stature, with a square, weathered face framed by a close-cropped shock of bristly white hair and a wildly unkempt, untamed white beard that shot out in every direction. He walked with a clumsy, awkward waddle, his short legs rocking his body from side to side, like penguin on ice. Yet slung low across his waist was a massive 4-foot-long traditional Japanese army katana. The sword was so absurdly long for his tiny frame that the metal sheath practically dragged against the wooden floorboards, making him look utterly ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up with a deadly weapon. But nobody dared to laugh. General Lin possessed a volcanic, unpredictable temper and held an absolute deep-seated contempt for the fleet's local Chinese commander, Admiral Yin the Bearded. Though their private offices were situated right next door to each other, sharing a single common wall, Lin treated the Admiral like an invisible ghost whenever they crossed. At paths in the narrow, wood-paneled corridors, the Japanese general would stare straight ahead, refusing to offer a single nod or a basic military salute, leaving the old Chinese warlord to retreat into his office and curse Lin's mother in bitter privacy. Slowly, the psychological colonization materialized in the very fabric of the base. The crisp, deep naval blue uniforms that had defined the fleet for a decade were gradually replaced by the muddy, that unappealing khaki and yellow-green wool of the Japanese army, creating a mismatched aesthetic that looked completely unholy. It was right in the middle of this tense, multicolored transition that the mandatory annual ritual of the fleet arrived. The dreaded winter camp inspection. This wasn't a routine parade. The destination was Hei, a heavily fortified, remote military border outpost resting on the jagged northern edge of the empire. For my American history buffs watching, think of Hei as the checkpoint Charlie of the Far East. Just 400 meters of icy, rushing river water separated the town from the Soviet stronghold of Blegovshensk, a city historically known to the locals as Hailanpao. This was the absolute front line of a silent, frozen war. On both banks of the river, heavy artillery batteries sat entrenched in deep concrete bunkers. Their massive iron barrels pointed squarely down each other's throats. In a state of perpetual hair trigger readiness, the proximity was so intimate, the tension so suffocating that during the quiet, sweltering summer months, you could actually hear the sounds of the opposing sides drifting across the water. The Chinese and Japanese soldiers could clearly hear the burly Soviet border guards whistling Russian melodies, laughing and shouting crude curses across the narrow watery divide. It was a place where a single accidental gunshot could ignite a global conflagration. On the evening of November 6th, at exactly 6,000 p.m., the Grand Inspection Delegation marched down the wooden piers of Harbin and boarded the formidable warship Yangmin. The anchors were erased, the heavy steam engines groaned to life, and the ship slipped into the dark river currents precisely on time. Admiral Yin had personally selected this exact evening. That sure, our deeply superstitious that the cosmic alignment of the double sixes, the sixth day at 6,000 p.m. would act as a powerful talisman, guaranteeing absolute safety and good, smart fortune for the perilous voyage ahead. Deep within the belly of the ship, inside the warm, swaying wood paneled command cabin, that a scene unfolded that captured the surreal, tragic nature of the era. Huddled around a low wooden table were Admiral Yin, Captain Liu, Adjutant Jin, and our primary guide through this historical labyrinth, the young translator Cheng Bao. Despite the evening hour, the men were sat together eating their morning breakfast, their internal clocks completely shattered by the erratic schedule of military deployments. Admiral Yin reached into his private, intricately woven bamboo tiffin box and pulled out his favorite culinary relics from his home province of Hunan. Did a pungent dish of bitter pother mustard stir, fried with fiery red chilies, alongside a plate of savory shredded pork tossed with pickled mustard tuber. But the true centerpiece of the old general's meal wasn't the food. From a velvet pouch, he produced a thick, pitch black, sticky medicinal ball of pure raw opium. With a practiced, weary motion, the old warlord popped the narcotic sphere into his mouth, washed it down with a heavy gulp of lukewarm water, and settled cross-legged onto his cot as the drug entered his bloodstream, softening the sharp edges of his reality. The old man let out a long, ragged sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a century. He looked at his fellow Hunan, his compatriots in the room, and whispered, his voice trembling with a profound poetic sorrow, "Boys, I'm getting old. My bones are tired. I think it's finally time for me to surrender my commission, lay down my sword, and slip away to my ancestral farm." In that cramped, vibrating cabin, surrounded by the mechanical pulse of an invader's warship, the quiet dialogue between these aging exiles echoed with the tragic, heartbreaking melancholy of a dying breed of warriors who knew the world had outgrown them. The Yangmin was a true beast of the river, pushing its engines until the iron hull vibrated violently, tearing through the dark water at a staggering speed of 40 knots. For 27 grueling hours, the warship sliced through the wilderness past endless miles of barren, skeletal forests and withered gray thickets lining the desolate riverbanks. Finally, at 9,000 p.m. the following evening, the vessel glided silently into the pitch black docks of the A Naval Base. The outpost was wrapped in a suffocating, dimly lit gloom, and the moment Cheng Bao stepped onto the frozen pier, a heavy, aggressive atmosphere of military paranoia pressed against his chest. As the inspection team disembarked, the local base commander, a stern Japanese officer named Colonel Yano, stepped forward to greet them. When he shook hands with Cheng Bao, Yano discreetly pressed a crisp, formal business card into the young translator's palm. Cheng Bao stepped under a flickering lantern and looked down at the card. Written on the front in elegant Japanese, the typography were the words, the Imperial Japanese Army, Kwantung Army Unit 7208, Army Captain Teinehashi Teshi. Cheng Bao flipped the card over and his breath caught in his throat. Scribbled in a familiar, elegant handwriting was a private, urgent message. If you can find a free moment, you must come to my home tonight. Cheng Bao's mind. Race Captain Teinehashi wasn't just a random military bureaucrat stationed on the freezing frontier. He was Cheng Bao's beloved history professor from his university days. Back in Harbin, a man who had profoundly shaped his intellect before being swallowed up by the imperial draft. The official itinerary of the winter camp inspection lasted for 2 agonizing days, but it was nothing more than an empty bureaucratic charade, a superficial walkthrough designed to fill out military reports for the high command in Tokyo. The real terrifying substance of the trip occurred on the evening of the second night, held inside Hei's most exclusive and luxurious Japanese establishment, known as the Sakuraya, or the Cherry Blossom House. A massive, decadent banquet was thrown to celebrate the unity of the armed forces, but beneath the surface of the overflowing alcohol and laughter, a lethal undercurrent of tribal hatred was reaching a boiling point. As the night wore on, its traditional boundaries of military discipline completely. Dissolved Army and Navy officers stripped off their heavy wool uniform jackets, unbuckled their leather belts, and began gorging themselves on expensive food and endless flasks of warm sack. The base adjutant, a Japanese officer named Captain Aguma, quickly crossed the line into absolute blackout intoxication, losing all sense of shame. Aguma began loudly groping and fondling a local Chinese serving maid in the middle of the crowded dining hall, creating an absolute public spectacle. But his drunken performance wasn't finished. In a fit of manic delirium, Aguma grabbed a massive ceramic bowl filled to the brim with scalding, greasy vegetable soup, lifted it high into the air, and dumped the entire contents directly over his own smooth, bald head. The greasy broth poured down his face in uniform as he threw his head back, laughing hysterically and screaming wonderful, pure bliss at the top of his lungs. Sitting at the head table, Major General Lin Baoji watched the display. His square face contorting into a mask of pure murderous rage, viewing it as an unforgivable insult to the honor of the Imperial Japanese Army. When Lin slammed his fist onto the table, stood up, and roared for his guards within seconds. 2 burly military police officers rushed forward, grabbed the dripping, laughing Captain Aguma by his arms, and dragged his body out of the banquet to alpha like a dead dog carcass. Seizing the chaotic commotion as the perfect smokescreen, Cheng Bao quietly backed away from his table, slipped through the sliding rice paper, the doors of the inn, and vanished into the freezing midnight streets to locate his old professor's home. When the door opened, the reunion between the young Chinese translator, Zet, and the aging Japanese scholar was profoundly emotional, a rare oasis of warmth in a desert of ice. Though Captain Teinehashi was forced to wear the intimidating olive, drab uniform of a brutal invading army, beneath the medals and the wool beat the gentle, tortured soul of a peace-loving academic. They sat together for hours, speaking of literature, philosophy, and the madness of the global war. As the clock crept toward the early morning hours and Cheng Bao prepared to return to his post, the old professor stood up, walked into his private bedroom, and emerged cradling a long, silk-wrapped object with trembling hands. He carefully peeled back the fabric, revealing a breathtaking, ancient traditional Japanese sword. Tonahashi looked at Qingbao, his eyes clouded with a deep, solemn gravity, and spoke in a reverent whisper. Qingbao, this blade is named Chp.6, the righteous vision of the rising sun. Over the course of its bloody history, Darat has been used to sever countless human necks and untold lives. But I give Yipsporum Q my most sacred vow. Since the day this heirloom passed into my hands, it has never tasted a single drop of human blood. Take it, protect it, and promise me that under your watch, this steel will never again be stained by human life. Deeply moved, Qingbao clutched the heavy ancient weapon to his chest and hurried back through the snow, toward the Sakuraya Inn. But as he walked near the entrance, he crossed paths with Staff Officer Endo, a legendary, cold-eyed tactician who was widely renowned across the Kwantung army as a lethal, master-level kendo swordsman. The moment Endo's sharp eyes locked onto the exposed hilt of the weapon in Qingbao's hands, his professional stone, effaced demeanor completely shattered. He lunged forward, his breath catching in his throat, and begged to examine the weapon. Endo gently drew a few inches of the polished steel of the blade, reflecting the cold moonlight with a terrifying, flawless gleam. His voice trembled with pure, unadulterated awe as he whispered, "My God, Qingbao, do you have any idea what you are holding? This isn't a weapon. It is a legendary treasure forged during the Kamakura period, hundreds of years ago. The craftsmanship is priceless, an absolute masterpiece of ancient steel." Qingbao carefully re-sheathed the weapon, slipped past the guards, and carried the legendary artifact directly into Admiral Yin's private upstairs suite at the inn, hoping to show the old warlord his new prize. But the quiet sanctuary of the room didn't last long. Within minutes, the heavy wooden sliding doors were violently kicked open, slamming against the walls, staggering into the room. The reeking of expensive sake and radiating pure, unadulterated malice was major. General Lin Baoji, the short Japanese general, was thoroughly intoxicated, his judgment completely unmoored by alcohol. Relying entirely on his status as a member of the ruling military class, Lin began aggressively hurling vile insults and provocations at Admiral Yin, completely disrespecting the fact that the old Chinese commander held the vastly superior military rank of lieutenant general. Lin paced around the small room, pointing his finger and sneering with a mocking, cruel laugh, loudly demanding to know if the old Chinese opium addict had remembered to pack a large enough supply of his black poison. Or if he was going to start shaking on the border, the air in the room instantly curdled, turning thick with an electric lethal tension, just as the confrontation reached a breaking point. Lin's bloodshot eyes dived beneath the low wooden turbo, catching the exquisite silk wrapping of Okabi-seiken. "What's this magnificent blade?" he roared, lunging forward, snatching the sword and ripping the long flat razor sharp steel from its scabbard with a terrifying ring, with a wild, manic gleam in his eye. The short general began violently hacking, slashing, and twirling the ancient longsword directly over Admiral Yin's head. The blade cut through the air with a deadly, high-pitched whistle, the cold steel flashing just inches away from the old man's face. It was an absolute live action manifestation of the legendary Xiangzhuang sword dance, a classic historical reference to an assassin who uses a theatrical performance, taught to corner and execute his prey while pretending to entertain them. But Major General Lin had made a fatal miscalculation. Admiral Yin wasn't a soft, modern bureaucrat. He was an old-school, blood-soaked Chinese warlord who had spent his youth surviving brutal, close quarters combat during the chaotic warlord era. He wasn't about to sit meekly on a bed and allow a drunken occupier to decapitate him. The exact microsecond Lin's balance wavered due to the alcohol. The old admiral's survival instincts exploded. A burst of speed that defied his advanced age. Yin lunged off his cot like a striking cobra, reached up to the wall coat rack, and ripped his ceremonial navy short sword from its scabbard. Herrick pulled the steel with a deadly metallic hiss, his blade pointing straight up at the ceiling, ready to plunge into Lin's throat. What followed next belonged in a cinematic masterpiece. The cramped, dimly lit Japanese tatami room transformed into a deadly stage play, mirroring the choreography of the famous Peking opera. Danshako, the three-way crossroads story about two lethal warriors locked in a blind. Desperate blade fight inside a pitch black room, the tiny Japanese general clutching the ancient longsword and the towering Chinese admiral holding the naval short sword locked eyes, their chests heaving, their muscles coiled with lethal intent. They began slowly, methodically circling around the low wooden table, their eyes tracking each other's weight, waiting for the split second opening to launch a fatal strike. The air was so heavy with the promise of death that the junior officers and translators stuck in the corners of the room stood completely frozen, their hearts hammering against their rebs, utterly paralyzed with terror at the prospect of a bloody, close quarters white blade duel between two high-ranking commanders. Just as the tips of the blades were about to clash, the sliding doors burst open once more. Staff officers Endo and Tamagawa lunged into the room, though throwing their bodies forward, and tackled Major General Lin, pinning his arms to his sides and disarming him. The terrifying lethal standoff suddenly dissolved into a chilling, echoing burst of manic, unhinged laughter from Lin Baoji. As he was dragged out of the suite, leaving the old admiral standing alone in the dark, breathing heavily with his sword drawn. The next morning, the physical hangover of the banquet had cleared, but the psychological tension remained. Before the inspection delegation prepared to board their ship and leave the border outpost, Major General Lin Baoji concocted one final, deeply twisted request. He commanded Cheng Bao to personally march him into the dark heart of Heia's local civilian district to visit the town's most popular gambling den. The establishment was a putrid, suffocating, subterranean hellhole that reeked of stale sweat, gutter wine, and cheap opium looking for more like a lawless bandit's mountain fortress than a place of business. Inside, Cheng Bao stood in silence, watching a heartbreaking scene of human ruin. Dozens of impoverished local Chinese laborers who spent their days performing backbreaking manual labor for the occupation were huddled around the wooden dice tables. They were throwing their hard-earned, blood-stained wages into the betting circles, watching their family's survival vanish in a single roll of the dice, pouring their life savings directly into the pockets of Japanese syndicates and local underworld bosses, while their starving wives and crying children froze at home. Major General Lin slowly walked through the crowded, smoky tables, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his heavy boots clicking on the floor. He didn't utter a single syllable, nor did he interfere with a single bet. But the chilling, detached expression on his face sent a shiver down Cheng Bao's spine. The general wasn't looking at human beings with souls. He looked exactly like an arrogant apex predator calmly walking through his private hunting grounds, evaluating the meat he was about to harvest. The return journey down the winding currents of the Heilongjiang River was fueled by a desperate desire to escape the suffocating paranoia of the border. The Yangmen pushed its steam boilers to their absolute structural limits, flying down the water at a reckless speed of 40 knots, the wake throwing massive waves against the muddy banks. But the river wasn't done with them. As the ship rounded a sharp bend lined with dense, overgrown willow thickets, the eerie silence of the wilderness was suddenly shattered by a piercing, mechanical scream. Too sleek, Heavily armed Soviet military speedboats materialized like aggressive ghosts out of the green shadows of the northern bank. They intercepted the Yangmen with terrifying speed, riding so incredibly close to the iron hull that you could see the cold expressions on the faces of the Soviet sailors. Their sirens wailed a continuous, deafening banshee shriek that echoed off the trees, a blatant and aggressive show of military dominance for one agonizing hour. And the Soviet boats pinned the puppet warship in their sights, refusing to disengage or quiet their sirens until the distant flickering lights of the A base had completely dissolved into the black horizon behind them. This harrowing expedition to the edge of the world stripped away any remaining illusions for young Cheng Bao. He had looked directly into the jaw of the border powder keg, and he had witnessed the profound backstabbing rot and treachery festering inside the high command of his own military unit. As he sat in his cabin, looking down at the magnificent ancient sword, with a slight notch in its steel, he knew it stood as a dark, silent omen. The path ahead for this navy without an ocean would be paved entirely in fire, betrayal, and blood. What terrifying secrets and dark conspiracies await our travelers as their inspection tour heads toward its next legendary stop, the opium-shrouded, treacherous marshes of Fujin, to discover how Cheng Bao survives the dark labyrinth of the approaching World War. You'll have to wait for the next chapter. Thank you for listening to Orient, Shadow's Archive. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below. If you were in Cheng Bao's shoes, would you have drawn your blade against the general or stayed in the shadows? Until next time, keep searching the darkness.